Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Lang, work for OPPD, our Director of Generation Strategy and Origination. Very excited for all of us to have Cathey with us here today. He kind of has a knack for making complicated things understandable. So looking forward to his issues he'll be walking through today. So real quick, the topic in general is kind of just a look at generation interconnection, transmission congestion issues at Southwest Power Pool. Do know that lots of these issues are being experienced nationwide. So Cathey will be hitting on a very SPP kind of specific perspective here. SPP has a very interesting background of when they were created, et cetera. So SPP was created back in 1941, and back then was the World War II era. And something interesting was going on in Nebraska at that time. And Offutt Air Force Base was constructing a lot of planes. And back then in the early 40s, the Nebraska Power Company served the Omaha area and Offutt Air Force Base. And with the construction of those planes, they had very sharp increase in load back then. And SPP was actually created largely because of World War II and some of the loads that were increasing for the national defense efforts. So interestingly, Nebraska Power Company became a SPP member back in the early 40s to help address and be able to pool generation facilities together to serve that increase in load that Nebraska Power Company was struggling to serve. And then in 46, the Nebraska legislature created Omaha Public Power District, which then acquired the Nebraska Power Company. So Nebraska Power Company just had a short kind of period while they were SPP members back in the day. So fast forward to today, OPPD has since rejoined SPP as well as other Nebraska utilities. I think we're mostly aware, but NPPD is a member, LES, the Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District, is a member in the Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska. So when you think of those entities, it's pretty easy to picture that SPP coordinates the vast majority of our generation and transmission facilities here in Nebraska. Cathey, with us here today, is the Senior Director of Grid Asset Utilization at SPP. Cathey actually comes from an interesting background in operations, so he's well aware of what it's like to be in the trenches and dealing with real-time issues. And today, and the types of things he works on, he can see and picture the types of decisions we make today from a planning standpoint and how that impacts real-time operations. So today, Cathey is going to discuss some modern day issues, if you will, around generation transmission facilities needed to meet our load growth that we're experiencing. And actually kind of has a striking similarity to what was going back in the 40s and why SPP was originally created. With that, please welcome Mr. Cathey.
All right, so I've got, 45 minutes. Maybe I'll talk for 35 minutes and then reserve 10 to 15 minutes of questions. See where we go from there. First couple of slides are kind of the obligatory SPP. What is SPP? But just kind of like to level set that with this audience. So our mission, working together to responsibly and economically keep the lights on today and in the future. We've recently changed kind of how we go about our mission statement. SPP is a nonprofit regional transmission organization. So really the whole essence of Southwest Power Pool and staff and existence is to pool a number of utilities. We actually have over 115 utilities and members within SPP as an organization. And our value is really what we can provide in overall business functions. Otherwise, I don't have a job. So we have to make sure that we're providing that value. So SPP is a RTO. I believe there's 7 RTOs. We work with them heavily within the United States. We also work with the Canadian RTOs and ISOs as well. So that's kind of SPP's current footprint. But we are expanding. And so this is quite exciting for SPP. We're actually on the southwest or west side of the Eastern interconnection. So we run a 60 hertz frequency for all of the Eastern interconnection. Texas is its own thing, as they like to be. So they're ERCOT, and they obviously run on their own frequency. We manage 7 HVDC ties all the way from New Mexico up to North Dakota. We actually have a single tie with Saskatchewan. So we're working with Saskatchewan. That's a whole nother topic. They're actually having challenges with supply as well, and they're hurting to convert all of their conventionals to renewables as fast as possible, just like everyone in the world. And so we're working to upgrade and have a kind of a bigger pipe to be able to help each other to Canada. But as you can see, there's a number of colors in the West that kind of help illustrate a number of business functions we're providing to the Western interconnection. Western interconnection is kind of interesting. You've got the Rockies, which are extremely difficult to build transmission. If I had a transmission map, we kind of call it a donut, but it kind of looks like a donut around the overall Rockies. And so you kind of have a lot of hydro in the north, and you have a lot of solar through Arizona and in New Mexico. And then, of course, California is a load sink because of just the population density over there. So we're expanding to the west. And our major function that just got announced and final agreement is we're adding about 6 gigawatts in the surrounding areas of Wyoming and Colorado and New Mexico for expansion of our full regional transmission organization. Actually, as of today, today's the 25th, we are starting data collection for our first Western Resource Adequacy Program in the West, and that's all that Peach area. And so that's kind of a novel singular tariff that we're actually facilitating as a program operator. Okay, so as a supply and demand, I think some of this is a little bit misleading. We actually have a lot of nameplate capacity, but as you'll see very quickly, that is eroding, and the quality of the capacity that we actually have online, we need more supply. That's just very apparent. We need wind, solar, batteries, we need gas, we need whatever can get on the line, we need it fast. We need more generation. As you can see, this accredited capacity for summer 2022 was 64 gigawatts. We just hit a peak. I have a couple of interesting slides on that at the end of August. So our generation mix, we have a lot of gas, we have a lot of coal, we have a couple of nuclear facilities, one of which is actually in Nebraska. We have a lot of wind. We're kind of the wind ISO RTO. It's quite interesting. Recently, SPP has kind of been a smaller RTO the first 10, 15 years of my career at SPP. But recently, not just MISO and PJM and other ISOs in North America, but also globally, been on calls with South Korea and Australia and Denmark. And, they're trying to learn from SPP. They're looking at us and saying, hey, y'all have a lot of wind. How are you able to do that? How are you able to manage the amount of wind that you actually have? And so we've kind of went from maybe the little brother RTO and to being the last to put a wholesale energy day 2 market in place in 2014 to now we're kind of the experts of wind management when it comes to SPP as an RTO. So as you can see, this is the energy production over time up through the end of last year. One thing to note is wind has primarily displaced coal over the last few years because of costs and offer curves associated with coal and wind. Gas has generally been the same. Can anybody tell me what may have happened to gas in 2021? Why there was kind of a reduction? Let's see. This thing doesn't work, does it? Oh yeah. Okay. This line of gas dropped. Can anyone tell me what happened with that drop? What happened in 2021 with gas? Price of gas. That's right. So you can see that wind has actually been on the steady rise year over year, and it's actually our number one resource for 2020 and 2022. And it just shy, basically was just under coal for 2021. But coal kind of had to pick up the slack for gas just simply because gas prices were crazy during the 2021, I guess, still in the pandemic timeframe. So yeah, to 38% wind serving load, that's pretty impressive. I started in SPP at 06, and at the time we had 1,500 or 1,600 megawatts of installed wind, and it was kind of just noise we had a display for wind, and it was just kind of off to the side, and we just didn't care about it so much. Fast forward to today, it's an asset. We actually have an uncertainty response team. We have multiple wind forecast vendors. We hired a meteorologist just a year and a half ago. We actually have to manage wind in a lot of different ways to try to predict what wind's going to do tomorrow, multiple days out, and then we have to predict when wind drops. Actually kind of become more of like a meteorologist over time, trying to learn about low pressure systems and high pressure systems. And, if a high pressure system just moves 50 miles in one direction across Kansas and Nebraska, then all of a sudden your prevailing wind, it's a three-dimensional problem at the 80 meter mark. They turn. And so all of a sudden the wind turbines stop. And so we have to make sure that we're predicting not only the wind drop, but when it actually happens as a time shift device, and then make sure that we have enough conventional resources to kind of pick up the slack. Right now we're at 32.5 gigawatts of installed capacity of wind, which makes up over 14,400 individual wind turbines across the region. So that's a lot of wind. This is a kind of all the green is the wind, so you can see kind of the capacity associated with that. So the green is where the wind is. You can kind of see where the gas is. This just kind of makes up the generation mix. One thing that's kind of notable is we have all our parts of 14 states at SPP, and the wind itself is regionally diverse. However, given the Great Plains and just the overall nature of the weather patterns across the United States and even Canada, we've experienced large wind drops almost to the point where there's no wind at all. And in fact, I'm going to fast forward to, I'm going to ask y'all a question real quick. Okay, can anyone guess what, how much wind? We have 14,000 wind turbines. Can anyone guess how much wind we actually got from 14,000 wind turbines June 6th? Did you cheat? You've heard it. All right, you're disqualified. All right, throw out a number. 14,000. We have 32,000. I mean, we have a lot of wind, and it's awesome, and it's impressive, and it's great. It's $0 fuel, incremental fuel costs. But June 6th, how much wind did we actually get? Wow, that's actually pretty good. That's like Price is Right. It's 110 megawatts. So you get the prize, whatever the prize is. So 110 megawatts. The thing is, and really I want to make sure this message, because this is the Wind and Solar Conference, and as SPP, I love my role because I'm fuel type agnostic. And the thing is every resource has its pros and cons. Every resource does not matter. Nuclear, we have to refuel nuclear. It doesn't really like to move. Coal, we've had some coal shortages before. Obviously it's expensive, and EPA doesn't like the emissions. Wind is very volatile. Batteries aren't a power source. They just aren't. They're a shifting device. You actually have to charge it first. You can't run the grid just on batteries alone, but they have very strong merits, as the previous panel mentioned. So you just kind of pick it at every single fuel type, and just like your own financial portfolio, you don't want to just put all of your retirement in one stock. That's probably not the most responsible thing to do. And so with SPP, what we like to do, we don't run a capacity market, but what we try to do is try to send the right signals to try to optimize what the best portfolio is moving into an orderly transition off of coal and off of gas. If societal pressures, environmental pressures, overall desire of the ratepayers and government want to continue to move towards additional wind, additional solar, we have to do it in an orderly fashion. And so when we see these things happen, it kind of makes us a little bit nervous. It gives us a little bit of anxiety, because this is not a peak summer day. It's not a peak winter day. It's just a mild June day. But we were short on capacity on a mild June day because of 110 megawatts extracted from 14,000 wind turbines. And so those are the types of situations we really are trying to get a handle on and understand from a capacity perspective. So I'm gonna go back a little bit. So this overall, I guess, title of my presentation was the queue. So I guess I need to talk about the queue. I've been responsible for GI since January. We did kind of an engineering reorg, and currently responsible for GI transmission service and resource adequacy. And GI is by far the most unique business function I've been responsible for since being at SPP. GI is very interesting. The question is, what is the philosophy of a GI? What is a generator interconnection process? What is the point of GI? You know, we have a pro forma tariff, 20 years old from FERC, and we've kind of iterated on that, at least 3 reforms. Now FERC Order 2023 drops, so we're kind of navigating the changes that 2023 has introduced. And each reform, we've kind of incrementally gotten better. You look at the GI and you can look at it glass half full and glass half empty. You can say, well, the GI process is broken. You know, it's just, I don't know what SPP is doing. They're not processing GI requests, and we've got gigawatts and gigawatts to be able to interconnect. I don't know what they're doing. The thing is, the GI process originally, back in the early 2000s, was not designed for wholesale energy mix changes. It was never designed for swapping out every single resource we have and replacing it with all wind, solar, and batteries. It was made for incremental gas peakers. It was made for incremental onesie twosies, load peaks. You know, Omaha's projecting a certain amount of load, or Lincoln's projecting a certain amount of load increases, so we need to build some capacity. We need to run through the GI. Fast forward to today, now you've got the Inflation Reduction Act. Even before that, you've had production tax credits. You've had a kind of an inrush of renewables, right? Which is great. That's what we need to facilitate. But we still have to, at the end of the day, we have to analyze what these generators are going to do to the system. And we have to be equitable. There's a transmission system that people own. They've actually invested in transmission lines. We have to be able to make sure that those transmission owners and those customers that have actually funded the transmission system continue to receive the right equitable cost recovery from building out that grid, while we allow and establish the right criteria for developing GI requests and understanding what impacts these new generators have. Because wind is typically sited not necessarily where the gas turbines were sited 10, 15, 20 years ago. Solar as well, batteries as well. So they're kind of in different spots. They're going to introduce different congestion problems. That said, we have made a lot of strides. So right now today, and it changes twice a week, but today we have just shy of 19 gigawatts of GI agreements in hand. So it's kind of out of our hands. So just shy of 19 gigawatts, and say, you guys, you have your agreement, you're good to go, you know what your identified upgrades are, go build. And I'm here to say, go build, because we're gonna need it. This data is actually, there's still 8 more gigawatts that we're waiting on some deposit money for. So if you look at the 127 gigawatts, we just peaked at 56, if you recall the previous slide. So we have more than twice our peak load that we just set in August in our queue, which is great. I just hope a lot of that gets built. That's the I know some of you are developers and maybe you're load responsible entities in here, but I hope we get a lot of that built. You can see some of the thermal. Now this is kind of exciting, right? You have to imagine the timeline over the next 10, 15, 20 years, and you have to imagine that there's gonna continually be pressure to shutter coal. It's gonna continue to happen. But gas, until there's something that's more economical and reliably dispatchable to displace gas is still going to remain somewhat very important aspect of balancing wind and solar as we continue to move forward. Because as I just mentioned, the 110 megawatts of wind, we don't have a lot of solar. So what do you think that we picked up June 6th? Anybody tell me, what do you think we actually committed to pick up the slack when we lost all that wind? Anybody want to throw it out? Gas. Gas. We don't have solar. We have 250 megawatts. We have a lot in the queue, and that's awesome, but it's just not built yet at SPP. So we're kind of waiting for that aspect. Also, the batteries. I think it is pretty important to note that we have 25 gigawatts of standalone battery storage. All of that, my understanding, is lithium-ion based, all very similar technology, 4-hour batteries. That's great. And just like the previous panel, we're kind of excited about that at SPP. I think obviously it's not a power source. You have to charge to discharge, but it has a lot of merit and value, even in the capacity realm, based on our load profiles and shifting, based on congestion, based on optimizing when wind drops. You can actually not have so much wear and tear on gas turbines to pick up the slack when you actually can deploy batteries in the interim and then pick up gas a little bit slower, which leads to less maintenance, which leads to more reliability of the gas turbines, which leads to longer lifetime, maybe not so costly to keep them around for another 10, 15 years to make sure that we're consistently and orderly moving towards more renewables. So what about amount is going to get built? I always get this question. I have no idea. I don't think anybody has any clue how much of that 127 gigawatts is going to get built. We do have data at SPP, and some of the data has indicated that we're more than twice the commercial rate. So that means that we used to be 20% in the queue got built, which is not great, but it's 20%. Now it's a little bit over 40%. Still not great. I've got kids in school, and if they came back with a 40% on their report card, I would be disappointed. So, has the reform worked? We are moving through the queue. We're working towards it. And this is without, put 2023 on the shelf. That's without 2023. So we're working through these numbers. Like I said, we have 18.8 gigawatts of signed GIAs in hand, ready to be built. But, it's very difficult to kind of look at what has actually been built based on, because not all developers are the same. There's purchase power grant. You guys probably know more than I do, all the background information on land siting, use, and how strong of a business case per the technology and what the supply chain issues are. And there's all sorts of different things that kind of go into this. And so as a region, we kind of look at it and we just hope that more than 40% of what's actually in the queue gets built. So, and this is how fast things change. We just closed a cluster, our 2023 cluster, and that was kind of interesting because we didn't have but maybe 2 requests in the cluster, and then we announced that we were going to close the cluster, and then everybody just rushed in, 10 days before the cluster closed, and it ended up being our largest cluster that we closed. It was 52 gigawatts in our cluster. This is on the website. This is already old. It's over 600 projects. And it's 137 gigawatts. So the top number in the red is already outdated. I just pulled this slide last week. So that's how fast things change in terms of when we thought we had just shy of 100 gigawatts in the queue, and now we've got 130 gigawatts in the queue. Good stuff. Again, hope that gets built. Okay, I'm going to move on to some of the, I guess, since the last wind and solar conference, just some of the notable events. One is, it's already been mentioned, I think the same exact slide that I'm going to present was already presented this morning. We set a new peak, and it's not just setting a new peak. Those of you that are involved in your load or you've had operations experience, typically what happens year over year is you kind of set some little load peak, 1%, 2%. Usually you do it for an hour. This time it was massive. We actually broke last summer's peak 5 times every single day that week. We actually broke it on a Sunday, which is really very, very rare. In fact, I don't even know if I've ever heard of that, especially not SPP, where you've actually broken your previous summer peak with a Sunday load profile. So it was super hot. And so we, I guess going into the June low wind, this is kind of a visual on what was actually happening when we had the June low wind, large persistent high pressure over Canada, and basically it led to just a massive drop of really no wind prevailing in any cut-in or within the cut-in profile of wind turbines at the 80-meter mark. But going to the heat wave, you all probably remember this. It was very hot. in Nebraska, but also around the entire region. Temps as high as 110 degrees. There are a variety of reasons why. I think the panels yesterday kind of explained some of the overall load growth. Obviously, when it's hot, the HVAC load is a big impact to it as well. Over 2/3 of the entire footprint was over 100 degrees, so that was pretty high. Okay, so this is a visual on the peak load. That first hump in kind of our overall sine. Usually in the summer we have kind of a sine wave as a region. That is over the 53,243, just right over it if you look. But then we far exceeded that peak from previous summer, 5 days in a row. So all week long, it was more. One other thing to note is that was not just 5.5% higher, but as you can see, it was multiple hours higher than the previous load. So very high loads. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears to resource adequacy, just from a time check perspective. I want to cover this. So earlier this year, SPP, the officers and the board deemed resource adequacy as our number one corporate risk. So I guess I want to let that sink in a little bit. This is our number one corporate risk, and that also includes Nebraska as part of SPP's region. Cybersecurity is already, I guess, a number one risk for SPP. I think that just my own personal view on cybersecurity is we're all going to retire, and cybersecurity is still going to be a risk. I mean, that's just the nature of the modern world. Hopefully, we won't be in that same situation with resource adequacy. There are things that we can do to lower that risk in resource adequacy. So that's kind of one of the goals. So what is resource adequacy? I like this analogy. How do I put this? Like, if you're a owner of a baseball team and you're your general manager or your coach, you guys get together and you want to build the baseball team from scratch, but you only have a certain amount of funds. You know, your Lincoln Electric or your NPPD, you have a certain amount of budget, right? How do you build out that baseball team? Well, you know, and there's been, I mean, Billy Bean, you can kind of look, there's been all these different analyses on who's the greatest coach and who's the greatest, you know, and how did they do that? And you can put all your dollars into one star player, and that has worked actually. You can kind of look at certain NBA teams and stuff that has, you just surround them with, you pepper them with kind of decent, okay, you know, lower paid individuals. But if that person hurts themselves, then will you win any more games? No. The answer is no. So the question is, how do you build that baseball team to where you have enough bench strength and you're trying to optimize your best players given a limited budget of funds that you can pay all these players and make sure that you can still win games? And that's resource adequacy. Resource adequacy is making sure that we're sending the right, you know, it's expensive. It's expensive to build wind, so any of this, wind, solar, battery, small scale, nuclear resource, whatever you just name it. It's not cheap, and it can't happen overnight. And you have to have it sited, and you have to have it located, and someone has to own it, and who's going to buy the fuel, and how is it built in the rate base? And there's all sorts of complicated things to go on with it. And so at the end of the day, you can't just build twice the team and just have star players abound. It's just not tenable. It's just not going to work, because at the end of the day, all of us ratepayers have to pay the rates for where we're at. And so the idea here is really trying to optimize risk. Is you're trying to optimize that risk and make sure that you're sending the right signal as a region for load responsible entities to design their portfolio, to design their team as best they can based on their load profile and what their individual goals and state's goals are, without being too expensive. So, you know, we could ratchet up our planning reserve margin to 200%. No one's going to go for it. No one wants to pay $3,000 a month in electric bills. I mean, it's just not going to work. So that's where that's the balance we have. Why is it a risk? So we run these studies called loss of load expectation studies. I'm not going to bore you with all the mathematical details. It's just millions of simulations. And all you're really trying to do, I like the graph on the bottom right. And I kind of visualize it like it's shifting the supply and the demand backwards and forwards to try to find a breaking point in what we would have as an appetite for risk for a region. And so that's your loss of load expectation. And generally, it's 1 day in 10 years is kind of what has been used for about 60 years now. I think EPRI kind of looked back. They couldn't find it beyond earlier than 1955, but it kind of goes back. It's been used for a long time. It's just kind of a typical criteria. That's what we use, and we try to figure that out. I think earlier panels talked about our planning reserve margin. We raised it from 12 to 15% last year. We have a lot of other activities. It's not just the summer planning reserve margin we're concerned about. It's also the individual fuel mix in transition over the next 10 to 15 years. And that's not to the least of which the amount of load growth we're actually seeing. I mean, one thing that was kind of an interesting observation is we've got engineers kind of predicting electric vehicle charging, how much is going to be adopted. You can kind of look at the industry. I mean, if GM and Tesla are kind of running their models, if Blink and ChargePoint are running their models on where they need to actually put the charging, who's actually buying EVs, all of that data we roll up at SPP and we try to predict where that's going to be. But some of the other interesting points are, if you look at SPP as a footprint, if you basically move trucks, EV trucks, or even if you're just taking a vacation and you're going across country, you're going to have to charge in the middle of SPP. You're going to have to basically charge. So that's just even more load. You just kind of, you start running through your brain on all the different electrification processes and heat pumps and all the different industries that are coming in, additional data centers. The loss of load expectation has to also consider load growth as well. So that changes your overall demand curve, and then it basically changes your risk profile. So as our demand curve gets higher, and we don't change our supply as fast, then obviously our risk goes up. So I'm getting close to time, but one quote I always like is Yogi Berra's quote, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. And that is what we're trying to do. Within SPP, I think it's fascinating. Load forecasting is fascinating, trying to understand human behavior and trying to understand industry behavior and kind of where, I mean, a number of you in the room probably have a lot more experience, just that's y'all's job. It's fascinating, but what's interesting with our industry is it's not just 10, 15 years ago, you could kind of look at the gross domestic product, you could kind of incrementally add, certain, people move into Omaha or whatever, you could kind of predict that a little bit better. Now, it's almost like every single thing is changing. I mean, we're getting hydrolyzers that are 400 megawatt withdrawals in a single point, kind of asking to interconnect. We're getting data centers, massive loads, crypto mining, these kind of very, very niche type of load changes as well on top of the traditional human behavior. And then on top of the human behavior is changing as well based on what they're actually trying to do at the residential and commercial industrial load. So it's electrification is real, and predictions are difficult. So, okay. Resource adequacy challenges. We've retired 7 gigawatts of conventionals over the last 7 years. And at the same time, we've installed another 24 gigawatts of wind. And so what is that? A 3 point something? I can't do the math on the fly, not in front of y'all, but it's 3 point something, right? Ratio. And we've actually increased our risk. And that's primarily because wind is variable. And so wind is a great resource when we have it, but we need to make sure that we have something to back it. And we're very excited for the solar that can help complement the wind. We're very excited about the batteries that can help complement the wind. But from a resource adequacy perspective, we've kind of gotten to the razor's edge as far as how much reserve margin we can actually count on reliably. And so that's why we're trying to send the signal. We've had extreme weather events. You look at 2018, blizzard, you look at the 2021 winter storm Uri, you look at last year, we had a winter storm Elliott. And so you can say that these storms might be 1 in 80 years or 1 in 40 years, but they're happening much more frequently. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, we need to fold that into our overall reliability profile and risk profile and send the right signals for margin. So I'm gonna wrap up here. I think I'm going a little bit over, but I'm going to talk about just the things we're doing and then open up for questions. So some of the things we're doing to try to mitigate this risk. Winter planning reserve margin. So right now we don't have a separate winter planning reserve margin. It's only summer, and we basically port that over to the winter. And so what we're trying to do is identify a separate winter planning reserve margin. We're actually in the middle of rolling out some of those results to the membership next month and kind of introducing that. That is going to play into, we don't run a capacity market, but there is a market that's more a bilateral market. So we set the requirements as a region, and then the load responsible entities do what they need to do to kind of buy or build for their particular portfolios. We're improving accreditation. That's very important. I kind of picked on wind. I want to pick on gas. Less than half the gas that we called on in Winter Storm Uri showed up. And so you kind of look at various types of fuel sources, and they're all somewhat, they're all machines. There's just limitations on some of these things. And we need to be able to make sure that when we're accrediting, and that means you're counting for that capacity in the future, that we're doing it not necessarily in an overly conservative way, but hopefully in an accurate way, such that we're giving capacity credits to wind and solar and batteries and gas and coal and nuclear and hydro. We're trying to do that in a very equitable way, but it's accurate so that we can, as a region, kind of get behind, we're okay. Load shed's going to happen, but we don't need to plan the system for excessive load shed. That's just, I don't think anyone in this room would be comfortable with that. That's not where modern society's going. And if you think about it, our highest risk hours are during the winter or during the summer when lives are at stake. It's not just a mild June day that's our highest risk hour. Reliability attributes, I want to mention this briefly, but we've stacked kind of the overall nature of moving forward with additional inverter-based resources and kind of where we're going to manage the grid. It's not just wind, but also once we get a lot of solar and displace a lot of our conventionals. Things like inertia and primary frequency response. And these are kind of embedded attributes that somewhat naturally come with synchronous generation, traditional conventional generation. And what we're trying to do is identify those attributes and maybe encourage the technology associated with inverter-based resources to keep the system reliable by introducing additional requirements for bringing primary frequency response and so forth. And then the last couple is fuel assurance. This has kind of been a big hot topic for, do we require firm gas? What does that actually mean? How do we, ensure that not only are we accrediting certain resources appropriately, but are we sending the right signal to make sure that when there are extreme conditions and extreme events, that we're accounting for those as well. So we're working on that. I think that's it. I had a couple of slides on Order 2023, but with that, I think we only have less than 10 minutes on the panel.
Hey, thank you. That was a great presentation. I'm interested in hearing about capacity accreditation for batteries and how that might vary based on their location. Are they at wind? Are they at gas, et cetera? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So we're actually bringing a revision request, a change to our accreditation methodology to our regional state committee and board next week. And that includes electric storage resources. And effectively, it's going to use the effective load carrying capability concept. That's kind of an industry concept. At a very high level, batteries are unique because the way that they get accredited has everything to do with them serving a net load profile. And so if we didn't have wind or solar in the mix, really what you could imagine is a sine wave of load. And so the value of capacity is the ability for those batteries to be able to displace that peak load by charging when the load's down. And so we're basically introducing that. We're also giving more credit for longer duration storage. So hopefully that kind of helps incentivize load responsible entities to maybe invest in longer, because it's just more valuable from a regional perspective to have longer duration storage. So we hope to file that next month.
Just a quick question on So we set a peak load, or SPP set a couple peaks this summer. That was within your kind of planning models in the past, or how well did that line up with what you thought peak load could be?
It was terrible. I shouldn't say that. I'm being recorded, aren't I? So we do a loss of load study every 2 years, and the loads that our members submit, because they're the closest to their footprint, is a P50 load forecast, and 56184 was our record. And that was greater than the third standard deviation from what was predicted in the 2021 LOE for 2023 summer, meaning that it was beyond 99.7%. So it was beyond our. If you look at the duration, it was off the chart basically. I think every LRE missed it, but SPP did too. It was unprecedented. So. We'll definitely learn from this.
So it's likely an outlier, but I hear a lot of talk on pump storage. Any pump storage in SPP, and what do you think is there any potential in the future?
My understanding is it's quite expensive and also very heavily location based. We do have a very large facility in Salina, is what it's called, in the Grand River Dam Authority in Oklahoma. And it works fairly well. It's a great resource. And from a long-term duration perspective, what we kind of see is that daily. It's not just 4 hours. It's kind of they pump and dump basically on a daily basis, and they do it for 10, 12 hours.
What has SPP done as far as capacity discussions on whether or not there needs to be a real-time capacity market? We hear a lot of different things coming out of SPP of potential capacity concerns of summer, winter time, different types of units, how much they'll be rated. I know MISO does a capacity a little bit different. I was just curious if you could enlighten us on what SPP's discussed as far as a real-time capacity market.
Yes, so there's a number of items at work. Our market design team we've kind of contracted with some consultants. We're working with some of our state commissioners and as well as our members to, over the next probably 9 months, come up with a conclusion for the next phase of the market. So we kind of have a target for mid next year to basically answer that question. At a very high level, we've kind of looked at ERCOT's, where they're moving with the price and credit mechanism. Our own market monitoring has kind of suggested a monthly market, like an availability market construct. I think that there was a capacity market question in the previous panel, and I couldn't agree more that, basically every design we've kind of looked at, you can look at it and say, well, it's a one-shot capacity market, it doesn't work, or it does work depending on what the region is. At least from an SPP staff perspective, we are beholden to the membership in region. And so at least my personal view is, as long as we're getting the right capacity through the right signals and our own membership is fairly happy with those particular signals and construct, we don't necessarily have to have a traditional capacity market. We can leave the resource planning up to the load responsible entities and the state's rights. But we may want to introduce something that is closer to real time to kind of better position, given additional revenue stream for certain resources that we may need. And I think that's the biggest challenge we're seeing is, do we need gas and coal 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when we have an abundance of renewables? I don't know, but we have a transition problem to where we need to keep certain resources online until we have enough other renewable types. And right now we just don't have enough.
John?
Well, it'd just be really wrong for you to come all the way to Nebraska and someone not ask you about the implications of our state's unfortunate challenges relative to building the R plan. And so to that regard, it seems to me that and this is not on the Southwest Power Pool, is on Nebraska, that we haven't got this transmission system up and running yet. But as you're scoring projects that are in the queue and you're looking at the costs of being able to put those new additional loads on the system, it would seem to me, and maybe I'm wrong, and that's the nature of the question, but it seems to me that it would cost more to put additional load on a transmission system which is already constrained and challenged for capacity, and as opposed to one that is healthy and robust. So is Nebraska being impacted in terms of the cost of our renewables coming onto the grid compared to states that have more robust transmission systems?
Yes. Yeah. The short answer is yes. Our plan in particular, that's a whole probably another topic to kind of unpack, but we do a queue based, and we basically assume that the transmission lines that we have notice to construct for will get built, and that includes our plan. So and then once we build those into our models, every subsequent queue request we analyze assuming those lines are there. And so when those resources, when the lines get delayed in being built, but the resources are ready to be interconnected, then we have kind of a certain limited operation service kind of process. But effectively what that does is increase the congestion costs in real time, and it basically pushes everything else and delays everything else. And I didn't really touch on transmission. We've built a lot of transmission as a region, but we need to build even more transmission. We're obviously load projections are one thing, supply and generation projections are another. But it's not just the R plan. We've seen kind of a collective delay in transmission build as of late in the last few years, and that's a lot to do with supply chain issues and really what's happening around the globe. And we're trying to mitigate that, but what we're actually seeing, we can study this and actually push out a notice to construct. It's out of our hands, just like the GIAs. But then if they don't actually get built, we're really making every subsequent GI request and load additional requests based on those particular assessments. So it's become a higher priority for us to try to figure out what's going on. How can we get these lines built faster?
You mentioned you mentioned like needing a balanced team. I think we all respect that. How much does interregional connection, or like FERC talked about this summer, I'm trying to think what they call it, like GETS, grid enhancing technologies, or whatever they called it in Order 2023. How much do those also play a role on the team?
Yeah. So the first question, we were talking about interregional planning. We do. So you may have seen the news headlines. We did recently get an award from the Department of Energy to help fund the JTI, the Joint Targeted Interconnection Queue, number of projects with SPP and MISO. Interregional planning, that absolutely, it got us, you can look at Uri and say we curtailed, or we shed 2,500 megawatt hours of load, but we were also importing a good 8 gigawatts at the time. So that absolutely has a key impact in how we can kind of manage that. But it has a lot to do with how, from a reliability risk perspective, can you actually count on your neighbor during those extreme events? Because a lot of times they're actually hurting as well at the same time. And so that's kind of dicey. From a GETS perspective, we are looking at a variety of those things because, if you're kind of in charge of the overall grid and you're just the master of the grid, what's the easiest thing to do? It's to try to extract as much value as your existing assets versus trying to build more assets. And GETS certainly has a play in that. I don't know that grid enhancing technologies such as topology control or fax devices or dynamic line ratings really get us to where we need to be 15, 20 years from now. But I think that it is a part of the story. It's a part of being able to extract more value out of the grid.
Okay. Casey, I know you have a lot going on back of the office, and you're gracious enough to come visit with us today. So if everyone could join me in